So it is now my pleasure to introduce Rafael Reuveny. And Rafael Reuveny teaches international political economy courses in the School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University. He is actively researching the relationship between economic forces and war. Rafael?
Okay, I'd like to thank Carol and the Center for inviting me here. And I will talk about the role of capitalism in war. It will be a little bit provocative, but I think that you will find it interesting. So I decided to begin by defining what we mean by capitalism, what I mean by capitalism. So this is an economic system in which consumption and production and exchange are maintained by private individuals. Capitalism evolved on its own for millennia to serve the basic human desire to increase consumption. We refer to that in economics as the paradigm of the more, the better. Okay, so what is the basic solution that capitalism offers? It allows people to make a profit in the production process. Okay, since profit gaining materially from production negative by the goods, then we found a solution. Capitalism includes two additional functions. One is the ownership function and the other one is trade. Laws and trade technology have evolved to support capitalism over time. From the law point of view, producers own the output that they produce, and they own sometimes all the production inputs, sometimes part of them. The element of trade is one where consumers trade with producers. Basically, give me a piece of the output and take something in return. So this something could be anything, including work. Money simplifies the trade. That's what I mean by trade technology. Instead of engaging in barter, you say, give me a piece of the output, I'll give you money. You can do whatever you want with the money, buy another piece of the output. Another legal part of the game of capitalism is that consumers own legally the piece that they buy. Okay, so capitalism. What is in the name? Why capitalism? Production uses human labor and capital as inputs, and capital includes land, natural resources, machines, industry, and infrastructure. By that I mean, for example, road, communication. So the name capitalism comes from, it's a system that is based on private ownership of capital, the means of production, and the outputs that this capital generates. To understand the connection between capitalism and war, we need to discuss capitalist ethics. The ethics goes like this: greed and egoism are good things. It's the engine of human progress, defined as more and classier, more expensive consumption. Competition in capitalism is a good thing, but winning is the best. If you fail, it means that you are lazy, unwise, or both. You should try to get better and compete again, but do not expect any help from me. Let's continue with the ethics. If something is good for business, then it is good for society. So, laws that are friendly to more consumption, more profit, is a good thing. Laws that help people who fall behind are bad. Why? Because they promote laziness and they lead to social decline. This should not surprise us, because this is the way of this world. Survival of the fittest is the basic nature of what happens on Earth. Let's talk about the connection of free markets and capitalism and the allocation of the output. Capitalists like free markets. So the idea for the role of the state is that the state should legislate ownership, otherwise stay out of my business. In this world, we should note, free markets have never allocated output equally across people. It simply doesn't happen. Many times, the 99% gets zilch, and the 1% gets the rest. The capitalists want and typically get the largest share of the produced pie. They say that this is fair. We invest, we buy the capital, we take the risk, we deserve a reward. Before we go to war, let's bring in yet another component, which many times is confused with capitalism, and that's the idea of political freedom. The two ideas are absolutely unrelated. Historically, the top capitalists owned some labor inputs, people, we call that slavery. Historically, the top capitalists always rejected granting political freedom for the masses. Today, the top capitalists seek to increase their share of the pie by lobbying the state for friendly laws. So, there's no connection between that and democracy. So let's bring in war and influence. The way war works is that only leaders can take the nation to war. Leaders do so if they deem war good, either for themselves, or for society, or both. We, the people, have our own ideas. We may support or reject going to war. But, as the saying goes, corporations, the capitalists, are people too, my friend. So, the corporations say that, the capitalists say that they have a right to influence the leader's decision. The capitalist influence is much larger than the influence of the people, of course, because it derives from the wealth, which gives them much more political power than the average individual on the street. So how does capitalist logic work for war? If a war is deemed profitable, it is good for business, so let's lobby and support it materially. If a war is deemed unprofitable, it is bad for business, do not support it materially, or lobby for it. Okay, so the question now becomes empirical. Have capitalists materially supported or lobbied for wars? Let's look at the history. By supported, I mean, and I'm going to use this supported in each of the examples, enabled with money and production, or lobbied for war, or both. Capitalism has been around for millennia. The Roman capitalists supported the wars of Caesar, the emperor. They gained from state pay, from the loot, and from enslavement of conquered people. The Roman economy was based on slavery. The feudal European capitalists in the Middle Ages supported the wars of the monarch in Europe and in the Middle East, we call that the Crusades. They gained from state pay, loot, and they were able to increase the number of the peasants following the wars in Europe. The European capitalists in the 15th to 18th century supported the wars of the king, gained from state pay, some of which they insisted should be in gold. Also, in the 15th to 18th century, the European capitalists financed the European colonial war. They gained from access to seized land and resources that were captured by the armies that they financed. They gained from indigenous enslavement and indigenous forced labor. In the 19th century, the American capitalists supported all of the wars of expansion in North America, and the Union and the Confederation had their own supporters among the capitalists in the Civil War. The American capitalists gained from state contracts and from access to seized land and resources in the West. European capitalists from the 19th century to the 1970s supported the European colonial wars. They gained from access to lands in Africa, in Asia. They performed state contracts. They gained from indigenous forced labor, indigenous enslavement, to the mid-19th century when enslavement was overruled per se, first by the United Kingdom and then by the other colonial powers. Same thing happened in the Australia and New Zealand cases. The German capitalists from 1870 to 1945 supported Germany's war, including Hitler. They gained from state contracts, access to land, resources in the colonies, forced labor, and of course, they made a bunch of money from enslavement in concentration camps. The Italian capitalists from 1866, when Italy came to be as a party, to 1943, when Italy left World War II, supported Italy wars, including the ones by Mussolini, again, gained from contracts, land, resources in the colonies. The Japanese capitalists, of course, supported the Emperor's War. They gained, again, in the same way. The British capitalists, no different. And American capitalists from the late 19th century until today support the United States wars and interventions. They gained from contracts. They produced the arms. During the colonial period in the Pacific Islands and the Philippines, they seized land and resources. And of course, they have enjoyed from cheap labor in Latin America and still do so today. So let me summarize and offer some thoughts. It is clear if you go over history that many capitalists have supported wars throughout history, including some of the most despicable wars that humanity had fought. Now, in principle, the state could fight wars also without the capitalist support. If the state would simply take over the capital and mobilize the masses to work and fight. It is easier to mobilize the capitalist support for war than the mass support, because the former, the capitalists, may profit while the latter may die. So states came to rely on capitalist support as they fight their wars. Finally, a new thing that I did not spend much on, but I'm happy to talk about it in the discussion, the whole idea of the more, the better as a goal is now changing nature as we know it, since we were socialized into it about 30,000 years ago as Homo sapiens. And this change in nature itself could lead to wars as well. I can talk about this last point in the discussion, as well as I invite you to ask me what do I think are policy implications of this short presentation. Thank you.